Hey everybody, I'm Daniel Orr. I'm chef and owner of FARM Bloomington restaurant. I'm a Hoosier. So I was born in Columbus, Indiana, born and raised, really love our state and love my background. Went away and I traveled all through the world and landed up in New York City and worked in some wonderful restaurants in France and Belgium as well. And even went to the Caribbean and worked for 3 years in Anguilla. And I decided to come back when my dad started dealing with some age-related issues, and I wanted to be there for him. And so I came back to my roots, and my grandfather had a farm down in southern Indiana. I had just been working in Anguilla, where we had a hydroponic farm, we had an organic arable farm, as well as a Caribbean orchard. So I wanted to come back and use my knowledge of homegrown food, local food, and just to share that with the Bloomington people. Well, when I was thinking about opening the restaurant Farm, it was kind of Daniel Orr coming back to the farm. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to kind of make it feel like there was multi-generational history in the building. And since it is a 100-and-some-year-old building, I wanted to kind of have different time periods shown. So there are early 20th century aspects, but then I also wanted to have it follow through. And we actually did some research, and there were some old bar stools sat in there that could have been for a ice cream parlor. When I bought it, it was a little store called Cowboys and Indians, and then there was a women's kind of new age store on the other side. So we combined those two spaces and came up with this space that I wanted to kind of tell a story in. It was a story of multi-generational usage of the building, that one of my ancestors could have been there and owned a soda fountain, owned a hardware store, which it was at one point. And then I came back as the kind of the son that had gone away and wanted to share my history of food and cooking with the Bloomington area. So part of the restaurant is, going through time, is the 1950s. And the 1950s were a time where America was kind of the country of the world, because we'd gone over and we had helped other countries and we'd saved other countries from different tyrannies. And so even when I was working in France and Belgium, I saw this kind of love of the 1950s in America. And then you think of things like Happy Days and all that kind of stuff. So when I started choosing different things to decorate the restaurant with, I chose, contemporary, different items that would be contemporary for the 1950s. So we have the boomerang formica on top of the bar and on top of tabletops. We have the different tile works in the bathroom and in front of the restaurant. And so I really tried to choose some items of that period that would tell that story. So there are things that are earlier than that, and there are things that are later than that, but I wanted to have that incorporated into my restaurant. Well, I was lucky enough to find the first editions of both those books. So I was really happy to find Julia Child's first editions of her first two cookbooks. And then I also have things like this, which I just love, which are old recipe files. So you get things that are handwritten, things that are cut out of magazines and newspapers, and it's just kind of like a treasure trove of that time period. And people really love to collect those kind of things and share them with their family and friends. And it was interesting because people had their signature dishes. That if they went to a potluck or they went to a family reunion, they went to different parties and events, weddings, funerals, whatever, they would bring their signature dish. And I just love to go back, and it's kind of like an anthropology of going through the food and the history of cooking. And I also have these other smaller boxes, and I actually use those for inspiration sometimes. And I just love that time period and people kind of discovering a new way of cooking. Well, the food of that time period was better and it was worse. We got inspired by different things. People coming back from both World War I, World War II, and the war actually created the cuisine because there were new things adapted to get food to the soldiers and food to people that were left without anything and were hungry. So they were lightweight, they were quickly adaptable. And so that was a great thing to have developed. And they were safe. They were nutritionally sound and they were nutritionally safe, which is incredible because before that, we had ice boxes instead of refrigerators. We had a lot of other things like that. We had coal and wood-fired ovens instead of electricity. There was a lot of stuff that was very different after the war, and the progress that we made was amazing. But it also cut back on a lot of the wonderful things about our country and our cuisines, and especially in the Midwest, our farm and rural type of family buildup. And so there's definitely a positive and negative. When I was little, I loved my grandma's cooking. And, she made the best fried chicken. She made the best biscuits and gravy. And all those things were handed down multi-generational. So, the biscuits that I cook at the restaurant are fourth generation at least, because my great-grandma made them, my grandma made them, my mom made them, and now I'm making them. And that goes on with our Wednesday fried chicken. It's a Gibson County recipe, and we still love serving that. And there's a lot more, including different brunch and breakfast recipes. And my grandma's favorite breakfast was a seasonal Hoosier tomato sliced and put on top of a piece of toasted bread, spread with a lot of butter and sprinkled with salt and pepper. And that was her favorite breakfast. So there are things like that that are just so simple, but so reminiscent of where we come from. Well, when they asked me to create a menu for this particular performance, I really wanted to do something that kind of touched back to that time period. And the things that we really know, we've heard of Waldorf salad, we've heard of chicken mushroom casserole, we've heard of, apple cobbler, but I wanted to kind of reach back and tell people a little bit about those dishes and why they are the ones I chose. So the Waldorf salad was obviously a very famous recipe from the Waldorf and then the Waldorf Astoria hotels in New York, which were the most glamorous places. And when we got into the post-war era, we really wanted to kind of celebrate and have these wonderful dishes that only the rich could have before. And things like mayonnaise were something that was very technical, and you had to take those egg yolks and whisk them with emulsifying agent and then whisk in the oil and create this luxurious mouthfeel of a sauce. And then came, Hellmann's mayonnaise and Miracle Whip even. And so then we became able to combine these simple ingredients such as walnuts and celery and apples and grapes and that mayonnaise, that rich sauce that would just luxuriously coat those things. And that became a staple for, family reunions, weddings, funerals, all those kind of group events that are so important in our day-to-day living. Next is the main course, and the main course is a chicken mushroom noodle casserole. And that was based on a recipe that was named after a famous opera star many, many years before the mid-century. And it was called tetrazzini. And they created this dish for this opera star that combined this rich, creamy sauce and mushrooms and turkey or chicken. And then they put it in a casserole dish and they crumbled a rich breadcrumb mixture over the top with some cheese in there. And that was turkey or chicken tetrazzini. But then when we got back into the mid-century, then we started to make that as a family dish that we could have all the time. And when we had the Campbell's chicken mushroom soup or the mushroom soup, and you mixed it with some chicken cooked chicken thigh meat or chicken breast, and then threw in some mushrooms, probably canned little button mushrooms, and then put that with the pasta and then topped it with the breadcrumbs and then baked it in the oven till it's nice and crunchy. That became a very special dish and was really a classic thing that people did with leftover Thanksgiving meals. So moving on to dessert, what I thought was, there are lots of things, Jell-O molds of all kinds. I love the stained glass Jell-O mold, where you took all these different colors of Jell-O, made them, and then chopped them up into pieces, and then folded them with this white, creamy mousse with gelatin in it. So it all sat up and looked like a stained glass window. I wanted to do that, but then, I was thinking, we're in Indiana. Let's do something that was more of a Indiana dish. So what I wanted to do was to do a more of a Hoosier dish so everyone could relate to it and we could think about that while you're watching the show. So what I did was a Hoosier apple cobbler. Now, in the original recipe, you would take fresh apples and you would toss them with some flour and some different seasonings, and then you would cook that with some fresh biscuits on top. But one of the things that was introduced in the mid-century time was Bisquick. And so you could just buy this box and mix it with some milk or buttermilk, and you could buy canned pie mix, put that in a glass chafing dish, and then top it with that Bisquick pie mix and sprinkle it with some sugar, bake it off. And that was a wonderful way to make a dish that Grandma used to make, but it took her a long time. She had to peel the apples. She had to core the apples. She had to slice the apples. She had to cook the apples. And then she had to make the biscuit mix and then put it all together. So it was a recipe that anyone could make very quickly with store-bought ingredients. It's very interesting because a lot of the things that we cook now and things that we cooked then actually started as post-war products, because all of the industry was about supplying the war with food, with weapons, with all of the other things. And so these factories were made and they didn't have anything to sell. So with TV marketing on, these items, as well as the new processes that they learned how to make canned foods, make dried foods, all those things that they learned to make for the soldiers were actually brought into the American society, and we started cooking with them. So I found that really, really interesting that, the war machine actually created the modern food machine. So things like Campbell's soup, things like dried soups like Lipton soup, things like gravies and things that were full of protein that would give people a lot of energy to fight or energy to survive were now products that we were sold by the new economy of the mid-century. I like to think of the other thing about these mid-century items, when we got out of the war, all the women had been working and been in industry and creating all these things for the war, from jock straps to whatever. And my grandma actually used to sew jock straps for the soldiers. So all those things. And my mom remembers raising rabbits with her father, my grandfather, for the war. And rabbits were one of the things that you didn't have to give to the war task. So you could actually sell those and make money, because it was so hard to make money with the rations and the different stamps that you had to have, the war stamps. And I still have lots of those kind of things from my grandparents. I have those old war stamps, and I'm kind of making different collages and different things with those to celebrate it, because I just don't want to see those things thrown in the garbage or burnt up or whatever. But yes, the women's movement really started. And once the women were working, they wanted to work and they wanted to bring in extra money to the family. And when the men came back, there still was that fight against that. You weren't a man if you didn't support your family. But then the reality was 2 incomes are better than 1. And so what did that cause? That caused people to need to cook very fast meals, for men to take over some of the responsibilities in cooking those meals or helping clean up, and to provide your family with healthy food that was high in nutrition, but that was quick to process and tasted great. One of the things that I really like to think about is, what kind of recipes came from that time period that we really appreciate, that we love, and that we want to recreate. And there are things that kind of give you a hug, that make you feel comfortable, that make you think of your past, your relatives. And one of the biggest things for me is homemade bread. I mean, it was so different when people got back and we were doing this industrial bread and Wonder Bread and different things like that. And, one of my favorite things is bread. I mean, everyone loves carbs. So to have a homemade bread is something that I think people really should kind of work on and taste and come up with one that you really like to make and that people really comment on, and then take that to the next family reunion, the next party. Create your own signature dishes that people love. Things that I don't like about that time period are that we got away from spending time with our grandparents, spending time with our relatives, learning the recipes from the old world, which we all came from. We're all from the old world. And, when we lose that touch with our, whether it's Croatian or Thai or South American or whatever, when we lose those family recipes, I think we lose a part of ourselves. And so that's one thing that I really hope that people will tend to do. And we seem to have more time now because of all these advantages that we have, that we should go back and bring grandma and have her teach those recipes to our families. Bring friends and relatives and other people from different cultures into our unit and have them tell us about their upraising and what they find important, what they are sentimental about. When I was growing up, I always loved going down to my grandparents' farm. It was down in Princeton, Indiana, which is a little bit north of Evansville. And my grandpa spent his whole life trying to buy up the old property of his family from the 1890s depression, not the 1920s depression. So he went back and he tried to buy up all of that, and he wanted to share that with us. And he took us on trips to Civil War sites, and he knew, he could memorize. He memorized these the Gettysburg Address. I mean, he actually memorized that and knew that clear into his 80s and early 90s. So I was so intrigued by going there and then going down and looking at the old creek, and he would tell me about what was brought across the creek and what was traded. And I just loved that. And then he always had a little home garden in the city, which was a very small town. And then he had the farm where he had a bigger site of where he grew multiple things to can and to freeze and to pickle. And that was such a great memory to be there and cracking beans and shucking corn and doing all that prep work. And they even had a canning kitchen. So you had a kitchen outside of your house that during the summer you could heat up so your house stayed cooler, and you would make these products to have later. You would can peaches, you would can, just about anything, and make jams and jellies. And those flavors and those personal recipes are things that I just cherish, and that it's a flavor memory. It's kind of like a plus de Madeleine, plus thought of that little Madeleine cookie that brought him back to his childhood. Those kind of things still remain with me, and I'm so happy that I have them, because I don't think that people that are growing up nowadays really have those. There's always a positive and negative of things, and we've talked a lot about this, about the loss of family traditions, but there were a lot of good things that for me as a chef came out of this growth in this post-war era. And, back then, you think of French cuisine. I mean, everyone who wanted to be a chef was a French chef. So that is very important to me. And that was important. I went and I studied French cooking in France. And nowadays, you hear about people all over the world that are wonderful and the best chefs. They don't just have to be from one country. You can have Japanese chefs. You can have Spanish chefs, Southwestern American chefs, South American chefs, Mexican chefs. All of those things were not known to America at that time. So I think that bringing in that, and Julia Childs and James Beard really brought in that classic French and classic American cooking. And so I think that's awesome. I also think that the convenience that came from these products made it easier, and people that were working a job or two, they could use some of these products to make a wonderful meal. I also love that there was a celebration of food during that time. You didn't just have, pull out a pizza and, maybe have a salad. You had people over and you had 3 courses. You had an appetizer, a main course, dessert. You probably had hors d'oeuvres and maybe a martini or a gimlet. So I miss that kind of celebration that happened much more regularly than it does now. I also love that we were able to create safe food, that we learned about different temperatures of cooking and safeguarding cold temperatures and learning how to preserve food to make them last longer. All that stuff was very important. What I don't like is that, when you create these new cuisines, there's always a hierarchy. And so rich people were able to use certain things, and then poor people had to use other things. So things like Spam were created for the soldiers, but then became kind of a go-to for people with less money, and chipped beef and the myriad of other items that were inexpensive, but they were not local, they were not homemade, they were not as nutritious, and they usually contained a lot of preservatives such as salt and different items like that, which were not healthy. And so that would be the bad end of the mid-century modern cuisine. Well, it's very interesting when you think about cooking in the mid-century, because it all depends on where you were. If you were in New York, and you probably had a lot of advanced technology that we didn't have here in the Midwest. And back then, it's interesting because it took years for that technology to reach the middle of the country. Nowadays, you go online and it's seconds. Something new is created and boom, it's right there in your pocket right there. But back in that time, it took years for something to reach the Midwest, and the whole technology, and be able to create these new innovations to be able to make it affordable to Midwesterners. So you think about things like the icebox. It was a wooden structure that was coated in lead and different metals, and you would drop ice in there, and you would use that to chill your foods, especially your meats and your different fresh foods. And you think about a stove. Nowadays you have electricity, you have gas, just comes right in. Back then you had coal, you had wood-fired stoves. And you know what? Some of those old techniques still provide the best tasting food. When I know grannies still to this day, few of them that I knew have passed recently, but they used to cook these wonderful pies in these old-time wood-fired ovens, and they knew exactly which part of the oven was the hottest, where the circulation of temperature went. They knew that stove like it was the back of their hand. And that's just amazing, because we don't know that. We have push your convection oven, and it's all the same temperature all around your oven. So those kind of things I really remember. And then there are all these gadgets that were created, and it's hilarious. These things that were created for all these little things. And we still, you watch late night TV and there's still these wacky gadgets, but go back and you look and there's these I love the old green, wooden and metal gadgets that were created for the kitchen. I collect them and I love them. And maybe you can see them. I might give a couple samples to you guys to look at. And when you go to Farm tomorrow, there are 2 things right outside my office that are boards of all those things.
Oh, cool.
That are really cool.
Okay.
One of the great things about going to a restaurant is to be able to have things that you can't have at home. And so at my restaurant, we have a woodstone oven, which of course you couldn't have at home. It's a $20,000 technical thing. Or even if you had actually a wood-fired oven, that's something that you wouldn't normally have at home to either make pizzas or bake bread. Unless you're a real enthusiast, it probably wouldn't be something that you had at home. And all these things that restaurants do have and allow us to make things at the moment, à la minute in français, in French, make restaurants taste different. So there is still a little bit of the mid-century modern technique of gas flamed and wood fired and old-time technology and grills that we can do to make your food taste more like the old-timey food. And I love that, and I love that restaurants can offer you that. Well, one of the great things that, I hate war, but that war did bring us was an experience of other cultures. So, during World War I and continued during World War II, we learned a lot about Italian food. So, pizza. Everyone thinks pizza's American. Well, no, it's not. And you think about other different cuisines, Greek cuisine, French cuisine, Spanish cuisine. All these things were kind of brought to America after the war because the soldiers came back and they had tasted this food and they wanted to bring it back to their families, and they learned how to cook it and they learned how to enjoy it. And then also you had the immigrants that followed the return of the soldiers that brought their cultures back. And since they didn't have a lot of education or knowledge of the American culture, they created their own culture here, but then adapted it to please the American palate and the soldiers' palate. And that really changed American cooking. And I love the thought of a melting pot of, all of these things coming together and sharing and learning, but it's not always easy. And of course, with the Japanese cuisine, when Japanese folks were put into these camps and separated and treated as other, then we lost the potential to learn from them. And only by bringing them back into the culture have we learned their cuisine, and we love it. Think about sushi. People love it. People have it weekly. So I think that, the Japanese cuisine is something that's very important, and it's part of American culture now. People talk about gas station sushi. What could be worse? But that is something. And to me, that just shows how, even the most... So I love that gas station sushi exists, because that means that even the most pedestrian American has an appreciation for it. I love sake, this is a box of sake. I love chopsticks. I love learning how to use different items from different cultures and eating. And it's such a fun way to share that, these different Japanese drinking cups and the rituals that go behind them, and the whole tradition of when you eat what, when you raise this glass when you pour this person their drink to honor them and to share with them and to respect them. All that is so interesting to me, and I'm so lucky to have Japanese friends, and I've one French friend that I worked with in New York who now is living in Japan, and I can't wait to go and visit him to see how it's done there and to appreciate their culture, which is a lot of it is displayed around the table. So a lot of times when we think of a Japanese restaurant, we think of a sushi restaurant, or we think of a tabletop cooking restaurant. Those things you don't really do at home in Japan. So one of the things that I've enjoyed learning about through my Japanese friends and through my own research is actual Japanese cooking at home. And a lot of those recipes are based around, one pot meals where you're making this broth with seaweed, maybe with bones, maybe with animals, but a lot of times vegetarian. And then you're cooking dumplings in it, and you're serving a bowl of rice on the side, and you maybe have some vegetable dishes, small dishes that you're sharing. And that home cooking and that old time traditional Japanese food is really, really interesting. And it's not what you get in America even to this day, unless you go to a big city restaurant that is going into that deep dive into traditional Japanese cooking. You don't really see that in America. And there's so much more we can learn about that. One of the things that I really appreciate about my life as I get older and, I'm in my 60s, is what I've learned from other people, from different cultures, from different thoughts, different religions, different viewpoints, is that in the end, we are all just one people. And the more you can give and take and share and enjoy with different cultures, the better. I dislike that we cut people off, that we turn our noses up, that we don't share, and that we judge other people by their food, by their ethnicity, by their sexuality, by everything else. We just need to love each other.